How's it going? That was underwhelming. How you doing? All right, there we go. I was just making sure you're breathing. So ushers can come on down. Let me share something with you real quick. Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourself treasures in heaven where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. We have these kind of conversations around the tithe and giving every week, and there's lots of reasons why it's important, but like if you get down to brass tacks, what Jesus is saying here is like, if where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Your heart cannot be fully God's if your treasure isn't stored up in what he wants of you and from you, right? And so in some ways, where your wallet goes, there goes your heart, right? And so I say all of that to say not to guilt you into the upcoming tithe time, so much as just to say like priorities are important. And how we prioritize our resources speak to what we believe of God and what he's asked of us. Does that make sense? All right, let me pray. God, we thank you. We thank you for each gift. We thank you for each giver, and we pray that you would bless both. Amen. All right, so we are, might get a little awkward this morning. So we're in chapter 3 of Colossians, and we're talking about like Paul's instructions on Christian households and how they should work. They're pretty brief. They're pretty self-explanatory. Let me just read it to you. You'll get it. First of all, nobody throw anything at me. Ladies, don't throw anything at me. Chapter 3, verse 18. Wives, submit yourself to your husbands as is fitting in the Lord. All right, we're good. Husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. Fathers, do not embitter your children, for they will become discouraged. So this is chapter 3, verses 18 through 21. That's what we're going to cover today. And it's really brief instruction. What we're going to have is we'll have 4 points that kind of track along with the verses, and then they got one kind of summarizing point. But the first two kind of go hand in hand, right? Wives, submit yourselves to the husband as is fitting to the Lord, or in the Lord. And then husbands, love your wives. And this is pretty much how Paul approaches marriage in his conversation. He does this multiple times in different letters to different churches. And to the modern ear, this isn't uncomfortable. The first sentence is very uncomfortable. Wives, submit yourselves to your husbands as is fitting in the Lord. That is a uncomfortable statement, because in 2023, when we read that, we hear unhealthy power dynamics, right? Like that's what our culture is teaching us to listen to and look out for. So we hear unhealthy power dynamics, and you instantly go to, why would I submit myself to anyone? Right? Why would I do this? And honestly, in a lot of ways, the way our culture looks at it, why would I submit myself to a man? That's a dangerous thought. I don't want to do that. That's uncomfortable. And we hear it we hear that first sentence through the lens of power dynamics, unequal power dynamics. And I think that's not what Paul's speaking to. Right? He does not set this up that way. If he were to be setting up a power dynamic that is to say, you wives, submit yourselves to your husbands, so be your husband's servant. Husbands, if it was setting up an unhealthy power dynamic, then it would be husbands, do whatever you want. But he says, husbands, love your wives. And in other letters that he writes, he compares the sacrifice that the husband is to make for the wife to the sacrifice that Christ made for the church. He's not setting up unhealthy power dynamics in saying this. What he's doing is he's setting up an accountability structure. This makes sense? So he's setting up an accountability structure. So has anybody ever worked in fast food or retail? Culture's about the same. It's just what you're doing is a little different. One, you stand around and fold clothes all day. No, thank you. I did that for like 2 months in college because I needed money. It was a seasonal job. I'll never do it again. That was awful. It's the worst thing I've ever done in my life. Just sitting there folding clothes, listening to emo music because that's how old I am. And I wanted to quit and I couldn't. So also did fast food. In these, I don't know, ecosystems, right? In the culture of these places, you have to have some sort of hierarchy, right? But oftentimes, these are cultures with low barrier to entry, right? So you're not trying to figure out how great a leader the manager of your night shift for McDonald's is going to be, right? You're just like, hey, are you gonna blow this restaurant up with the fryer or not? Or like if it's a clothing store, you're just like, hey, if somebody comes in and they're being a real jerk and trying to return the clothes, are you gonna cuss them out or not? That's kind of the barrier to entry here. So you're not really thinking about it. And what happens a lot of times is I worked at Chick-fil-A, right? That was the main job I had growing up. And Chick-fil-A is probably the best run fast food chain there is as far as I can tell. It's God's chicken. So y'all should have been amen and louder. Logan helped me out a little bit. You eat a bite of it and you get holier. But anyway, Raising Cane's chicken strips are better. But anyway, so it's in that culture, they did a pretty good job of having solid leadership and hierarchy and all of that, right? But you always knew that there was when I was a kid, there was this one manager. He'd come into work, and you knew that shift was going to be a nightmare because this is what was going to happen. He was going to disappear about an hour into it, and he would be counting money all night, like we had a $100,000 day. We didn't. I mean, that's a lot of chicken. And he'd be counting money all night, and he'd disappear, and there's nobody in charge of what's going on. What happens when that happens, there's nobody in charge of what's going on. That means there is not a single person who is able to take accountability for that shift, right? When I was coming up, I played football. We were awful. One of the reasons we were awful is because we had awful leadership, right? And so the way that it works in the football world is your quarterback is the leader of the offense, at least, maybe the whole team, but at least the offense. If your quarterback negates the responsibility of holding everyone else on the team accountable, now there's no structure. What he's laying out here is a system of accountability. This isn't wives, submit yourselves to your husbands so that you can be their servant forever. It's listen, when we walk up to the judgment seat, your husband is going to be held accountable for how your family functions, for how your family has operated, for what God has been able to do in your family. He is the one who is going to be held accountable for this. Therefore, help him. Right? So, a couple of other passages to help us out with this, all right? The first one is 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7. Let me flip to it real quick. I didn't do this last service, so I don't have it. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7. Basically, what he says here, oh my goodness, I'm struggling with what order Peter comes in. That's not normal. What he says in here is, forget it. He says in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7, husbands, be gentle with your wives, for she is the weaker vessel, so that the Lord does not hinder so that your prayers will not be hindered, right? Now, you hear that and you go, oh, she's weak. Literally, she's physically smaller than her. Don't hit her. Otherwise, God won't listen to you. This is accountability. You are to deal with her in love and in compassion and in gently, and you're to cherish her. And if you abuse her in any way, God's not listening anymore. Your prayers are hindered. This is, again, accountability, right? You go all the way back. We go back to the story of creation, which this one is important because the Jewish Christians that Paul is speaking to right? They would have kind of tracked with how this works, and they would have seen this in light of the creation story, because for them, the creation story is like our Pilgrim's Plymouth Rock story, right? Like we read the Bible and we see the Bible as the Bible, but if you're a Jewish Christian in this day and age, like the creation story is their origin story. It's how this all started, so they would have known it just like the Pilgrims and the Thanksgiving, and it didn't really happen that way. They probably didn't have turkey. They probably did have, anyway, probably had deer. But anyway, they would have known it that way. And so the beginning story, the original sin, the problem there is that Eve ate the apple, right? On the face of it, you're like, okay, Eve's fault. No, that's not how God saw it at all. Eve ate the apple because Adam abdicated his responsibility to lead in this relationship and let that happen, and then followed along with it. And Adam was held accountable for both of their actions. And when it talks about sin, it talks about it coming through Adam. So he's setting up an accountability structure. More practically, in our homes, there has to be order. Families should be orderly. Somebody's got to be responsible for getting this thing from point A to point B. And the Bible says that the person who's going to be held responsible for that is the husband. So family should be orderly. There's got to be some kind of order. Now, the flip side, husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. Husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. We screw that one up a lot, right? How many of y'all get into fights and it goes like this? I can't believe you did that. I thought I was doing what you wanted. That's not what I wanted at all. How am I supposed to know? Right? It's kind of how all of our fights go. And this is why this stuff goes hand in hand. Because wives, submit to your husbands. Husbands, love your wives. The way that this gets unpacked by most pastors is this. Men need respect. Women need to be loved. Right? You've heard this sermon before? This is the sermon that always gets preached. Men need respect, women need to be loved, and so you should give that to one another. And so that's the way we typically talk about it. However, when we do talk about it, I always feel like the sermon is unsatisfying in a handful of ways. The first one is, I just wish that it was like Marriage for Dummies. And it was like, here's 10 steps. If you do these 10 steps, it'll work. You know what I'm talking about? But Paul, this is where he goes every time. Wives, submit to your husbands. Husbands, love your wives. And it's like, dude, if you could give us 10 things that if we absolutely do it, it'll absolutely work, this would be awesome. Let's do that. And it's like, nah, you got to live in this tension. So ends up making the sermon a bit unsatisfying. The other piece to it that always tends to make me feel like, is when that sermon gets preached, it almost feels like this. Wives, your husband needs respect, so you should concede that to them. Husbands, your wife needs to be loved, so you should concede that to them. I.e., like, hey, he's having a bad day. He's having a bad day. You should support him and tell him he's awesome and not, nobody get mad at me, not nag him, And then husbands, like, she's having a bad day. Bring her flowers. It's a concession. It's a throwaway. You know what I mean? It always feels that way. I'm not saying that that's what pastors are saying. I'm saying that's the way it feels. And so I was unpacking this whole sermon this week because, like, I don't know. Honestly, because I was just trying to figure out, like, can I find that 10-point sermon, like Marriage for Dummies? Like, can I figure that one out? Like, somehow I'm smarter than Paul. or every other author that's written from the Bible on marriage before. I just want to know. And so I'm riding down the road and I'm thinking about that this week. And it just like, I don't know. So when God speaks to me, it's different. You hear that. You say, when God said this to me. And like when I hear that phrase, I hear, like, I think audibly, like some booming voice, Robert, and I'm in the car, I'm like, oh, God, It's not really how it works with me. It's like this. I was driving down the road and thinking about it. I pulled into my house, I parked the car, and then I knew something I didn't know before I had put the car in park. It just kind of happened. And so it just hit me. I think a lot of times when we unpack this, like we're like, how do we make marriage work? Whatever. And the way it plays out is, it can be kind of a concession. I want you to feel loved, so I'm gonna try to respect you and respect your authority. I want you to feel loved, so I'm gonna try to show you love. So like, when you're having a bad day, I'll listen and not look at my phone, and I'll bring you flowers and chocolates or whatever. And like, that's just kind of how it is, but it's like momentary. And it just hit me. It was like this: what if, instead of looking at it that way, we took a second and we just said, you know what? As a husband, I need to set the tone for love in my house. I need to be the one I need to set the bar for what love in this house looks like every day. I need to set the bar for what loving my wife looks like every day. I need to not have her asking for more. And what if as a wife, the same happened? I need to set the tone for respect in this house every day. He needs to not walk in here and feel disrespected. Because like ultimately, these are the tropes in our society, right? You have the nagging wife and the disconnected idiot husband, right? Not right? Okay, so you guys also watch sitcoms. Got it, right? Yeah, you have that in our culture. You have these two things. And here's the thing. They are stereotypes, but they are stereotypes that reveal some truth. There's a disconnection that happens that's widespread enough that they can write shows that use this as a comedic piece, right? So everybody can relate to it on some level and maybe laugh at it a little bit, but the truth of the matter is that it's debilitating, this disconnection, right? It's debilitating because the divorce rate's like 50%. Across the board, this disconnection is debilitating. We make light of it in our culture, but it's there. And so what if instead of conceding what the other one needs, we led in what the other one needs? Because like you read this and like in our minds we think about it that way, but Paul's not setting this up as a concession. This is his primary advice as it pertains to marriage. And when that hit me, when that hit me, I was like, my immediate thought was, what a fool I've been. So let me tell you something about my house. So in my house, if my girls get a little bit disrespectful with me, Amanda is always the first one. Like she actually does set the tone for what respect in my house looks like every day. Like to the point that it makes me uncomfortable. Like the girls will get an attitude with me and she's like up and she's like, listen to your daddy, he's always right. And I'm like, no, I'm not. Please don't tell them that. I was wrong like 3 minutes ago, dude. Like she sets the tone for it every day. And then I thought about myself and I was like immediately convicted because I don't always do a good job of setting the tone for what love looks like in my house, for what loving my wife looks like to my girls, right? I don't always do a great job of setting that tone. A lot of times, I especially recently, because it's just been stressful and crazy, I come home and And rather than going, okay, I need to walk in this door and I need to be a loving husband to Amanda because because that's what the Bible calls me to do. That's who I'm supposed to be. And that's what she deserves. And it's what my little girls need to see. I walk into the house and I'm not walking into the house like, hey, everybody serve me. But I do walk into the house and I'm like looking for everybody to do what I want them to do so that I can feel better about my stressful day, right? So I'm not like, hey, serve me, but I am like, hey, I really hope they do something funny or cute. I really hope Amanda's in a great mood and she's just gonna give me a big hug. And I'm looking to be gratified rather than trying to set the tone of love in my house. This balance is super important. And look, the other thing that I said about, I wish that there was a 10-step plan and all of this stuff. Like, one of the things that I think we make the mistake of doing is we make the mistake of taking scripture and wanting it to be specialized in the way that our current literature is, right? Does that make sense? Like, you got a bookstore today, right? Well, you'll have a bookstore for another couple decades probably, and then they'll disappear. But we got bookstores, we got online stores. Everything's got a category. So like if you're looking for a book, you go look for the category. Once you find the category, you look for the specific book you want in the category or whatever, right? And like that's the way we unpack things, is like everything is specialized. I mean, dude, that's not what the Bible is. And so we want this like specialized advice, like, hey, let me explain something. Paul's saying, as in a Christian household, you need to live in this tension. The wives, you need to submit to your husbands. Husbands, you need to love your wives, i.e., give him the respect he needs because he's going to be held accountable today. Give her the love she needs because she is your helper in that accountability. She is the thing that's gonna, so you guys work together. This isn't a hierarchy of who's better or who's worse. This is just a accountability. This is how we're gonna roll, right? And so you have that. This is the basic tension he wants us to live in, and it's a lifelong pursuit of getting it right. But that advice is not given in the absence of all the other writing on what it looks like to be a Christian. It's like, hey, this is gonna be the main tension you're dealing with. Deal with this tension carefully, and then in everything else, act like Jesus. And so this tension is hugely important because of the next thing. Verse 20, children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. So families should be orderly, families should be loving. I skipped that point. Family is foundational. This tension between husband and wife, mom and dad, figuring out how to live in that and find balance in it is huge, because the Bible tells your children to honor and obey you. So, how you screw that tension up will carry on with them. And how you get it right will carry on with them. One day when they're looking for a partner, they will look for the attributes that you have shown them. If you've done it right, and if the Lord's blessed, then they'll look for those attributes in a positive way. If you screwed it up, they'll look for those attributes and they'll try to get the opposite. Or if you screwed it up, they'll look for those attributes and they'll get somebody who's like you, and that will screw up their life further. Which one are you gonna be? I was having a conversation this morning with Pastor Shannon. We were having a conversation about generational curses and generational blessings. And like, I know like it's 2023. So when I say generational curses, you're like, is this hocus pocus? Like what's going on? Curses? But here's the thing, like what we're talking about is how through generations God works or is not able to work, right? And so generational curses would be generationally a family has passed on sinful behavior, sinful thinking, sinful action, and it happens and it repeats itself and it repeats itself and it repeats itself. And God wants to fix it, but he's not been given the space to. Generational blessing is when the people have lived lives that honor God, and that passes on and that passes on and that passes on. And God is able to work in that family and through that family on a constant basis. Now, we see this all the time. Like, you may hear the term generational curse, generational blessing, and be like, that's weird. But like, you see it all the time because you see patterns of addiction passed down through generations. You see patterns of good choices passed down through generations. You see, we have a whole, like our culture talks constantly about generational wealth. That's good financial choices that get passed on generation to generation to generation, right? So like, we see this, we acknowledge it. This is a spiritual truth. And so maybe you were born into a family that is dealing with some generational sins, some generational curses. Are you gonna be the one who ends it? Are you gonna let God work? Are you gonna let it stop with you? Maybe you were born into a family that's dealing with generational blessing because God moved in the lives of your grandparents and your parents and in your life as a kid. Are you going to continue that or not? And so the family is foundational. It's foundational for your children. The Bible teaches them to look at you, be worth looking at. And I mean, in children's church, we're gonna teach them to honor and obey you. Be worth obeying. Be honorable. And that first tension is the thing that gives you the ability to build a strong foundation. If you screw up the marriage part, it's gonna be really hard to get the kid part right. Anybody who screwed up the marriage part, don't feel discouraged. God can move and God can do what God does, right? But the truth is still the truth. It's harder than it would have been if you got it right in the first place. And in that, God will walk with you and he will lift you up. But don't screw up the next one. You know? Family is foundational. The last thing, fathers, do not embitter your children or they will become discouraged. Family should be full of care. This is another spot where he calls out dads or husbands specifically. And in both cases, it's interesting that they have to do with traits that stereotypically would be seen as, the love is a trait that would be stereotypically seen as feminine. And then being harsh with your children is a trait that would be stereotypically seen as masculine, right? And it's interesting that Paul's coming against that, especially because a lot of times the culture likes to tell you that the Bible's repressive, but Paul's literally speaking into problems that we're trying to attack right now. Super cool, right? It was written 2,000 years ago and it's relevant right now. And so, look, this is one that I worry about. There's a balance that I'm trying to strike. So I don't know, I've only been a parent for 4 years, so I'm not really gonna try to give you specific advice so much as to tell you something I struggle with, right? And the principle, which is family should be full of care. So I have 3 little girls, and I grew up with 2 brothers, and my mom, you would think that in that house, that in our house, our mom would have been the one that was like, sweet and gentle and everything else. My mom, she is sweet, not gentle though. Like, she'll straight tell you like it is. Now, she'll listen to you complain for a half hour, not criticize you, and then tell you like it is. So like, I guess in that sense, gentle, but the words are not gentle, right? I speak very bluntly and very simply, and I think in a lot of ways I'm more like my mom than my dad in that, even though, anyway, most people may not agree, but they don't know my mom as well as I do. So, and so like our house, it's just like, if you got a problem, we're gonna put it on the table and we're gonna talk about it. And there's 2 rules. You're not gonna be disrespectful and you're not gonna be angry after we're done. And that's just the way we dealt with stuff. So like everything's just real matter of fact. Because it's all dudes and one lady who's like super logical. Like this is just, I don't know, logical to an unhealthy level almost, right? And so like that's the way I grew up. And then I got these 3 little girls and like, yo, they cry. I don't know why they cry for no reason. Yeah, like this is the sweetest thing that happened in the last month for me. But I had to stay late at work or something, and Nora, they were sitting down to have dinner, and Nora just started crying at the table. And Amanda's like, "What's wrong?" And Nora goes, "I just really miss Daddy. I keep staring at his picture because I miss him." Which, like, dude. Double-edged sword, right? Because I'm like, that's amazing, but also I feel so guilty right now. I'm a piece of crap. And I should be there, you know? And so, like, this is what I've been given is these 3 girls that I have to shepherd into strong, independent women, right? And so for me, well, not strong, independent women, into strong women who are dependent on Jesus. And that would be the more correct way to view that, by the way. And so, I'm like, how do I do this? You know, and so for me, this is it. I don't want my girls to ever stand in front of any man and get spoken to like a man and be intimidated by it. So if we have a problem, I'm gonna talk to you like I would talk to a man, and you're gonna deal with it, and we're gonna move on, right? But there's a line in there. Because they're still little girls, and I don't want to embitter them against me. And this is the thing that this is where I struggle, right? Because listen, I don't think I'm a scary person, but I've been told I can be intimidating, probably because I'm really loud, and I'm gonna tell you exactly what I think, right? So I figure if I'm gonna talk to you in a way that most people would not enjoy, you'll be able to overcome anybody. Most people. I mean, some people are really scary, but it's just true. You know, but I don't want to be harsh with them and embitter them to me. So yesterday we were hanging out at the house, and we had some friends over, and one of our friend brought his son, and he was trying to watch football. He's like 9 years old. He's trying to watch football. He's trying to be one of the boys, but he's surrounded by these 2 little girls that are just trying to impress him because he's an older person. It's like, look at me do this, you know? It's like 2 hours straight of this. And at one point, they like have him tackled and covered completely in pillows. And I'm like, okay, stop. Because like, you're gonna do that to one of your friends that's your size and kill him. Like, stop. And I'm like, both of you come over here. 1, you know, just go straight into the 1, 2, 3, you know? Because like, that's how, the 1, 2, 3 works. I don't even know. Anyway, so they come over and I'm like, you have to let him watch the game. And Nora just stood there for like 10 seconds after that, like this bewildered look on her face. And she goes, "Is that all you wanted?" Like it didn't have any attitude either. Like she was genuinely confused. And in that moment, I realized that I was harsh for no reason. Like the kid wants to watch the game, but also he's a 9-year-old kid. He's gonna forget that he didn't get to watch the whole game in like 3 seconds. Matter of fact, he did forget because his dad took him to get a milkshake later and he was fine. And they're not gonna get in trouble. I'm not gonna spank my kids for not letting their friend watch a football game. They're just having fun. And I was like, I think I probably overstepped right there. Like, what's the point of getting so harsh with them in that moment? It's another balance that, especially as dads, we have to strike. Like, there's gotta be discipline. There's gotta be order. There's gotta be respect. There's gotta be all of those things. But they also should feel more free to hug you than to argue with you. You know what I mean? Anyway, that's the whole thought there. The sum up point, like if I were to take all of this, and just kind of try to wrap it up into a bow, not because it needs it, it doesn't need it, but But I think this is worth saying. Family should be absent of self. That's the last thing. Family should be absent of self. That's the moral of the story, what he's saying here. You know, you can't try to walk into, wives, you can't come up to your husband and try to like give him the support and the respect that you need to give him, and you can't do that and have that as a focus. Be the leader in respect in your house. Have that as a focus, and it all be selfish. Like that doesn't. Those two don't go together, right? Men, you can't walk in, try to be the leader in love in your house, and then everything be selfish. Those two can't happen at the same time. You know, you can't set a good foundation for your kids that's centered on selfishness. You know, you can't lash out just because you're upset and expect for your kids to come to you when they need care and they need love and they need a hug, you know? Like it has to be absent of self. Like at the end of the day, like what you gotta accomplish is the removal of my own desires and replacing that with like what's best here. What is most godly here? How should I operate in this moment, you know? It should be absent of self. Well, growing up, you know, it was interesting we had the conversation, generational curses, generational blessings, all that. My mom and my dad both come from like poor Southern farmer pastors. Like those are the two things. Like in our family, people were either pastors or farmers, right? And they kind of come from that thing. By the time my mom came around, you know, her parents worked in the mills, the textile mills and stuff, but they came from a farming family. And my dad's, you know, stepdad was a construction worker, but he came from a farming family. And after the construction went bad in the 80s, he started farming again, you know? So like this is the background my family comes from, and is super duper conservative, Christian, all of that stuff, right? And what that lends itself to emotionally when it comes to like love in your house or whatever is like it's deep, it's abiding, and it's not said. Does that make sense? Like if I go up to my mama Brenda today and say, love you, she's gonna have to recalibrate her brain for about 5 seconds to realize what she heard me say. And it's 50-50 whether she's gonna say love you too or thank you. Like, that's just the way she is. I know she loves me. The woman's barely had 2 nickels to rub together her whole life, but every time she sees me, she leaves me $40. She loves me, you know? And my grandpa's the same way. My mom's dad, he's the same way. He, you know, it's 50-50 whether he's gonna say thank you or not, and he does not expect you to say love you to him, but he does love me, right? And so, like, that's the way that it is, and that's the way they kind of grew up. And then in my house, it was, like, not that way, but kind of that way, you know what I mean? So growing up, it was, I knew my parents loved me 100%, but like it wasn't like super affection. We said, I love you too, all of that every night, you know, getting off the phone, all of that. But then like hugs were like this, you know, the standard guy hug where you come in, you got one arm under, one arm over, because it's weird if you go 2 arms high as a guy. So you go one arm under, one arm over, and then you pat twice just so they know you're not coming onto them, and then you disconnect, right? That's how I've always hugged my dad. Like if it's an emotional hug, you get 3 pats. You know what I'm saying? That's just the way I grew up. But I gotta be honest, like this conversation is so, I watched it play out growing up. You know, I watched my mom would always stick up for my dad. She would let me complain and then tell me why I was wrong. And I'm sure now that I'm older and we've talked a little more, I'm sure she probably thought he was wrong on some of those, but she didn't let me know. And my dad, if you showed anything other than respect and love for his wife, he would come at you. Like, I've done this to my little girls just because it's a learned behavior, and they're 2 and 4, so it's probably shouldn't. Anyway, we would disrespect my mom, and he'd just turn around and be like, I don't know who you're talking to, but that's my girlfriend, and I'll hurt you. I don't say that to my kids. I just say, who are you talking to? But anyway, with guy to guy, he was threatening me because that's what you do as a man. So, not that it's healthy, but, he wouldn't let us, so like I watched that play out where my mom defended my dad and the respect and that he needed and how we all needed to get in line behind him. And I watched my dad set the bar for what love looked like in our house. And then it was very helpful for me. And then, the full of care conversation, this is crazy, this is wild. So when I was in college, I was bad at college. Like I did not succeed. I just got in these cycles where I would get super lonely and super depressed, and like I just floundered. And so I went to one school, dropped out, went to another school, dropped out. So I was in school. It was in South Carolina, and it was fall break, and I came home. And it was Sunday. I had to leave Sunday afternoon to get there for class Monday morning. And it was right after church. I walked into my dad's office and I said, I can't leave. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't know what will become of me if I get in that truck and I go back down there. I'm not okay. Like, I'm not okay. This is not working. I'm super messed up. Keep in mind, literally a year and a half earlier, he had kicked me out the house because I was acting like an idiot and told me, you can either go to school or you can find your own place to live. And I was like, I'll go to school because I can't afford my own place to live. Literally, that's how that went down. And he said, you can come home in the morning. Stay home tonight. In the morning, get in your truck, pack your stuff up, and come home. We'll figure it out. Now, I didn't tell my mom that. He told her later. My mom would have looked at me and been like, suck it up. And then she would have Asian mommy and been like, get better grades too. That would have been how that went. Because I had bad grades. That was part of why I needed to get out. Pack up your stuff, come home. It's okay. So I was able to come home. I watched all of it play out in my life, and looking back on it, I'm not telling you that they were perfect. They weren't. But what I can tell you is the principles that Paul clings to here, they work. I've watched them work. Like I've lived through them working. It's not marriage for dummies. It's not parenting for dummies. It's marriage for people who follow Jesus and parenting for people who follow Jesus. Track with the principles, add in all of the other lessons, and then pray your way through it. Let me pray with you. God, let us be a church family where generational blessings continue and generational curses end. Not because we're like awesome or anything like that, but because we actually decide to submit to you and we actually decide to follow you. We actually decide to lead our families in the way that you would have us do it. We decide to live this out in the way that you would have us live it out. God, I just pray that for those of us who come into this with a ton of hurt, a ton of family hurt, a ton of pain and wounds and all, God, I pray that you would heal that you would make all of that better. That where there needs to be forgiveness, you'd give strength to forgive, and where there needs to be healing, you'd heal, and that you would heal that so that we can be people who follow you, and so that we can be people who your blessing flows from. And so that we can have families that are life-giving. Lord, help us as we seek to be better husbands, better wives, better fathers, better mothers. Let us be the best version of your children we can be so we can be better at all of that. We love you and we thank you. Amen.